drinking black coffee today in a Colorado mug from Starbucks. It's actually Tuesday at 10. That's the time I always wanted to start, and today I did. I'm talking about things that changed the world today because it's election day, and I wasn't planning on talking about the election, so I have to talk about something. All right. So I'm just drinking black coffee today. If you're watching and you only drink black coffee, then Bob, be happy. Okay. It's not going to be a habit, though. It's just something I sometimes do. All right. So today I was thinking about, uh, well, it's election. And I don't know what happens to you during election times, but for me, one of the things that happens is every year I get piles and piles of different physical mail, and then I get email, and I'm just barraged with and there's a certain line that I used to believe passionately. And recently, I've just come to think that we need to be very, very careful how we use words, and this line doesn't serve us well. And we basically say something like this. We say, now more than ever, we need to be involved in the election. And that might be a true statement. And then we'll say something along the line of, like, this, our entire future as a nation hinges on this election. And that might also be true as a statement if you actually examine the way action leads on to action, and decisions and things that happen leads on to the other thing. But a lot of times I hear these things in the context of someone who's trying to raise money, either for a campaign or for a purpose. And the idea is that right now the pressure is on, and that this is the most important election of our lifetimes. And if we don't do something now, we're going to lose everything within the next 24 hours, is kind of the feeling you get. And so there's a certain anxiety and pressure that starts building and saying, wow, we've got to make the right choices. We've got to make the right decisions. We've got to do the right thing. And so, to be completely honest, I remember back, 20 something years ago, we had just come out of the Amish. And then just as I got old enough to vote, I think the first presidential election that I voted in would have been when George W. Bush was running for president. And we lived in Texas at the time. And I remember becoming involved in politics that year, just trying to understand how things worked, and then becoming involved on the county level with with it was the Republican Party of Lavaca County there in Texas. And over those next, very quickly in the next year or two, I began to really see how politics worked, how elections worked, and how we would have, you know, county level elections, and then we'd have state level elections, and then it went to the national elections, and you'd see all these different levels of power. And what you saw is that there were certain people who were in a public office who were very much in the public eye, and they could make decisions, they could sign things, they could speak things, they could inspire us, they could depress us, And I started seeing how important it was that we had good people in each of these positions. And so I started working to get good people in all of those positions. And I remember getting several emails, because at one point, as we came up to an election, and I don't remember which election it was, it could have been that first presidential election, it could have been midterms in 2002. I don't remember exactly, but it was one of those, and I had crafted an email, which I looked for this morning and was not able to find, and so I have to just tell you from memory what I remember about it. But in this email, I was explaining how um, important it was for Christians to be salt and light, and how important it was for us to vote. And I got some strong kickback from people saying, come out from among them, be ye separate. Like, what are you doing? You're selling your soul to the devil. Stop going into politics. And at the time, I examined what they were saying, and I didn't agree with them then, and I don't agree with them now. There are people that I do see. So even in my audience of people that would listen to Coffee with Pastor Joseph, I have some folks who have taken a more Anabaptist position and who will not vote, but they will pray and they will live, and they will do things to help their people, their fellow man, and the country. And I had to come to a point of being able to respect that and um, to understand it. And I do. I understand this, the idea from the beginning with the Anabaptists of the two swords, and how it's very, very difficult to carry both the word of God and the sword of political government. And it can be very difficult to actually keep things where they are supposed to be. The whole matter of jurisdictions that I talked about back in, I think, 2020, in the Coffee Talks here, comes into play. It can be very, very difficult to keep things where they're supposed to be. So I know that the potential for me to share about my thoughts on election day, and it's very possible that I'll have someone come on and comment about how we should never ever vote, and that's just getting in bed with the devil, and I shouldn't do that, and lesser of two evils, and blah blah blah, and just don't do it. And then you have other people who come on and say, if you're a Christian and you're not doing this, you're living in sin. And so these are very, very passionate positions. And I feel like over the years, God has worked in me a place where I'm very comfortable. And so some of you are wanting to know right now, well, it's election day. Did I vote? Am I going to vote? And I'll tell you. But I just think it's very important to think through a few things. And so to think through those things, here's something that happened to me in the past year. I was reading through the centuries leading up to the time of Christ. And I was specifically trying to fill some holes in my own world history. And, it's pretty easy right now. You can go to history.com, you can go to Wikipedia, you can go to a bunch of, and then you can go to some Bible sites. And between all of those witnesses of what they're writing, you can get a sense of what actually happened, right? But one of the people that I came across was Alexander the Great. And Alexander was the what do we call him? The prince elect, I think is what they say, of Macedonia. His father Philip was the king there, and his father was kind of crazy and would and several times kind of tried to kill him and then decided against it. And this was kind of a rough childhood, really if you want to talk about father wounds, Alexander would probably qualify for having quite a few issues emotionally because of how he grew up and such. And so you have here Alexander the Great growing up, and at 12, he gets this wild horse, Bucephalus, and trains or tames this wild horse. At 13, he is tutored by Aristotle. And by 336 BC, age 20, he becomes king when his father is assassinated. And so if you've ever read about Alexander the Great, he immediately then goes and just is he takes on Persia, defeats Darius III or Darius III, and he just goes. And so I actually have here, let me see if I can find this map real quick here. Yeah, here we go. This one, where we have, this shows all the area that he eventually actually took over. And so you have a huge amount of because over here, right down here, there's This is Babylon. And, oh, I went a little too far that way. So down here and here. So here we see Babylon. And so this is like when we study the Bible, we read about things that are happening here in Jerusalem. And like when Daniel is carried off to Babylon, and then we hear, oh, the city of Susa. These are all things that we, if you're familiar with the scripture, you're familiar with that. But then you also have the things like up here, some of these names are familiar too because this is where the church went. Cappadocia. I mean, if you read Revelation, you see some of this, and then eventually you see Paul. Like, well, we're not even seeing Rome here, huh? There we go. Like here's Italy, and so this whole area. Here's Macedon and Thrace, and so we have this area here where Alexander the Great starts, and then he goes all the way, and he's a king, historically made a huge impact on a lot of people, and just took over the world at the time, just kept marching, and would have continued with his military conquest, except for his generals were like, no. His army was like, we're going back. We're done. We're not crossing that river. It was a bridge too far. They were like, no, we're not doing that. And so he came back, and on his way back at the age of, like, in his 30s, 33, I think, he died in Babylon of some sickness. And his motto was, according to to history.com, his motto was, there is nothing impossible to him who will try. So he's basically saying, well, you say it's hard or impossible, you don't know that, try it. Go ahead and do it. And so Alexander the Great, most history books, if they're talking about world history, Alexander the Great shows up. We're somehow he's in here, right? And this is to my point this morning. And just now I'm seeing the chat messages that came through earlier. So good morning, Ina. Thanks for joining. And John, thanks for joining and saving it for later. So here we are in 300 years before the time of Christ. World-changing stuff is happening. In fact, after he dies, it's kind of the end of an era, which in some ways was just him. But we have the Hellenistic world that then comes in with his four generals taking over. And actually, like, you have the four kingdoms, the Asia Minor and Thrace. You have Macedonia and Greece, the Ptolemaic Empire and the Seleucid Empire, all come out of the land that he conquered. And so we have all of this coming from him. It's world-changing kind of stuff. But here was the thing that really caught my attention as I was studying about Alexander the Great and things leading up to the time of Christ. I just started wondering, Alexander the Great and his armies were off doing stuff, and he had his people that were writing stuff down, and so we know where he went and what he did and who assassinated who and the intrigue of the just all of that stuff. But what about everyone else? Because if you look at this and you look at this map, you realize that this is covering a lot of people all the way through here. All through this little area here, we've got people living and dying. And, it's not just here, it's all across here. So you have, according to people who study this kind of stuff, around that time frame, there was somewhere between 150 and 230 million people was the population of the world. Now, those are very, it's hard to get those numbers to be actually accurate. But the main thing is that down here in this map, there are people who are living and dying, who are getting up every morning and going out and, planting seeds, growing a garden, milking the cows. There's people getting married, and none of it is being talked about in the history books because it was too boring and too ordinary. And yet, Alexander the Great, he dies, and he dies in Babylon. Now, he's the king of Macedonia, but he dies in Babylon. He spends very little time in his own kingdom. He's got, I think, Antipater is the trusted guy who's in charge of the kingdom while he's gone. And so my mind suddenly starts realizing that yes, we study the king, we study the conqueror, we study the great, but what makes the wheels of the world go round, what makes the world go round, is the everyday, ordinary people getting up, going about their business, and coming back home, and then getting up tomorrow and doing it again. And what culture is, what happens in a culture is dependent on how the people respond. And so if they start looking at Alexander the Great, going, "Oh wow, he's awesome, let's be like him," and they start, killing their close friends and stuff, while they're drunk in a fit of rage, then the culture goes bad real quick. But if the culture says, "You know what this guy is doing, sure, he's our king, but he's wicked, and that's not right," and they live their own lifestyle separate from the king, and they live in righteousness, then the culture can actually grow and be better. And so my whole thought process on this was that there is a potential of us missing the importance of the daily life. And so you might ask me, did I vote? Because you're thinking that's going to change the world, and I have to vote so that the right people come in. And you might tack on, if you're a believer, you might, well, and did you pray? We have to pray for our leaders. And sure, those are good questions, but the things that change the world, when I look back over my own life and see what has kept me true on the path that God has called me on, sometimes it's a simple listening ear. Sometimes it's a hug. Sometimes it's someone coming and asking a few questions, going, I'm sorry, I'm trying to understand what you're saying, what you're doing, and I keep thinking that you say one thing and you're doing something else, and it's kind of like a rebuke sometimes. But many, many times in my life, the things that blessed me was because someone else was being faithful day in, day out. And so if I met them this year and we chatted, they were consistently loving Jesus, pursuing God. They were telling the truth, not just speaking the truth, but they were telling the truth in their own hearts before God. They were loving their families, loving their wives, loving their children, raising them up. And then if I met them 3 years later, they were still being faithful. 6 years later, still being faithful. And I think in the end, that's the thing that really changes the world. When individual people say, "As for me and my house, I will serve the Lord." And so sure, there can be great things happening on the world stage. There can be people spouting great words against the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and people saying things that they ought not to say. Right now in America, we have this huge battle where there are people outright coming out and espousing the killing of babies, literally saying, "We will defend your right to kill your child." And they think they're doing the right thing. They're so confused that they think that defending abortion is actually a right thing. But the thing that really matters day by day, so yeah, we want to defeat that on a national level, but the thing that really matters on a day by day thing is that we're each being faithful in what we're doing. Hi, Peter.
Hey.
You're wearing flannel. Is it cold outside?
No, it's mostly my inside stuff because my pants that I have are black, but they're not very thick.
Okay.
So this is more of an inside, cozy feeling thing.
Oh, so it's
and
almost...
it also matches.
So it's almost like wearing your pajamas all day, but not.
Yeah.
But it's long sleeves. Okay, so you're wearing them inside because what you guys doing today?
School.
Schoolwork?
And working on the show that we're doing.
Ah. You talking about the theater show that Mom's directing? Yeah.
We were one of the other choreographers was here to do some choreographing. Figuring out the finale.
Yeah, helping out what happens at the very end of the Esther show. That's
because it's always been boring, so we're trying to help it a little more.
Yes. So good. And Well, I am just chatting about, well, today's the election, so I'm talking about that and some
Yeah.
other things that actually change the world. So thanks for checking in.
Yeah.
So, like the issues that are on the ballots, like, I don't know about your ballot, but my ballot here in Colorado, it had stuff on it like making it legal to smoke marijuana in more ways, making it legal to use psychedelic mushrooms for more ways of pleasure in more ways. Just odd things when you stop and think about the whole scheme of life. Uh, and then there are all the names of people that are being voted on. And some of them stand for abortion. And when you go look at their websites and you look at stuff, you see that they're boldly proclaiming that they want to maintain the right for abortion and stuff like that at all costs. And so, I'm a bit of an observer on Twitter. I'm not very active over there, but I'm a bit of an observer, and it just is crazy the amount of, there's people saying red wave, people saying blue wave, and so people are very, very, very. This is an important election, and it is. It is an important election. I don't want to say that it's not, and um, here's a good moment to throw this in. So, in conversation in recent months, I came up with this, and I think we might have shared it here. I'm trying to remember. Anyway, there is this thing in storytelling where we talk about, oh, well, what if you got a time machine and you could go back in history and visit any time or any place? Like, and so one of the concerns whenever people are writing these stories or talking about it, they're concerned that if they go back, 100 years or 200 years, they might accidentally do something that would forever change the world. For instance, they might go back and accidentally get their grandpa not to marry their grandma, and then they wouldn't exist anymore. And so or they might accidentally go back and help someone discover some discovery, and it might just change the world forever. And almost never in this discussion is the idea that what we do right now will actually change the world that is coming. And so, just as concerned as you might be if you were given a time machine to go back 20, 30, 50 years or 100 years or more, um, we should be concerned about our actions now, because what we're doing now is actually impacting the next generation and what's to come. And so, here are a few of my thoughts. Some of the things that change the world the most is individual people choosing to keep their word, choosing to love their family through difficult times. One of some of the most life-changing things that have happened to me is when Stacy agreed to marry me, and then we shared our vows later that year. And then every year since that, she chooses to love me, to stand by me. And we have to, doesn't mean it's easy. There's times when we go through very, very difficult conversations. We have to choose to talk through those. And so that changes the world. So every time you find a man or a woman who is 100% committed to the Lord and is willing to love God and love people, to love their family and to be faithful, to keep their word and to keep doing the next right thing, I think that changes the world. Maybe more than the changing of the guard at the top of a nation. Because here's something to think about. We can make the law on the books, like you can have a group of people put a law on the books that says abortion is legal. But if you have all the people of that nation loving God and loving life so much, you can literally have nobody getting an abortion because everybody has come under the fear of the Lord and is enamored by the love of God and loves life and loves people so much. So you might say, oh, that's impractical. But it is a possibility. You can literally have a law to forbid something, or you can work on the hearts of people until they wouldn't want to do it anyhow. And so those are two ways, two prongs of the same battle in some ways, is you go after the law to protect life, but then you go after the hearts of people to love and cherish life. So when I think about what happens throughout world history and we read the big names on the stage, every single time that you read the big name, and the big deal that's going on, you have to realize that there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of individual people living in households all across the land. And what they're doing is preserving the next generation. Occasionally, you'll have a king who is busy making babies and other stuff like that, and he might impact a lot of generations in that way. But honestly, a lot of times they're busy doing stuff that will pass away once they die, and the next person who rules after them will try to erase a lot of what they've done. But here we are, and we get to live in a way that where we honor and remember the preceding generations that went before us, and we inspire the next generation to follow Jesus, to know him, and to walk with him. And that's really something that will change the world. You know, Alexander the Great's motto, "There is nothing impossible to him who will try." Like, I find that in so much of self-help culture and the life coaching culture today. Like, you've got to try, you've got to try. And it's true, you've got to try. Like, a lot of times we talk about something, and basically what we're saying is, I like to think about doing this or that, but we don't actually want to do it. And so once we decide we're going to do it, we try, and it's amazing what will happen once we try to do something. And so we have to, so I don't want to dismiss everything that in that motto that Alexander the Great had, but I wanted to think about it. 300 something years after him came Christ, and he walked on the earth, and he said a few things that people said, what in the world? That's impossible. Like, for instance, he said it's easier for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven than it is for, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And the people around him were just like, well, that's impossible. Like, what? And Jesus just simply said this. He said, with men, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible. That's over Matthew 19, and I think it's in one of the other Gospels as well. And so this idea that with man, this is impossible, with God, all things are possible. This is phenomenal, because we'll look at a political situation and say, wow, unless we do something, this is going to be horrible. And granted, I am saying that what we do daily with our lives is going to change the world. But sometimes we're being sold a bill of goods that is not entirely true. We're being told that unless we elect a certain person to office, or unless we defeat a certain proposition that's on the ballot, then it's all over. We're done. And I just want to say that what's impossible with man is quite possible with God. In fact, it's quite easy. And so God can change things so quickly in a culture. But the number one priority that we as believers need to have here in America is to make sure that our hearts are right before God, that we're seeking his face, that we know him, and that we're walking with him. And then, as we're doing that we're being faithful and we're representing Christ in his faithfulness. We're representing him to others, so to our spouse. And this is, Christ was willing to be crucified in order to be reconciled with his bride. Many of us, when our bride is off, when our spouse is off a little, we're not willing to be crucified. We are just willing, we're ready to throw in the towel and say, hey, I'm done. That's hard. It hurts. They're wicked. Well, the bride of Christ, the people who come to Christ, we were wicked. We were so wrong. And we needed to be saved. And Christ was willing to die for that. And so when you look at how extreme Christ was willing to be to rescue us and bring us to himself, it's pretty dramatic. And so I want to suggest that we allow the same Spirit of Christ, that same Spirit that is willing to lay down our lives for others, to come in for our daily, all of our relationships, our families and things. And let's find a way to find reconciliation, because that is the actual fabric of the nation. That's what will actually make a country stronger or weaker, are the people of the country truly fearing God and walking with him. And then I think we live in a country where we've been granted a lot of freedom, and where the founders of this nation really put a lot in for us. And they were trying to give everyone a right of conscience. And so you have a right and an obligation to decide what you're going to do with that. So you can say, I'm going to pray for my country, but I will not take part in the vote. And you're fine doing that. And I can understand your biblical position. Or you can say, you know what? This is one way that I get to participate in what happens. And in a small way, I am responsible because I live here and I see all of this. And so I want to speak. And so this is one time that I will not be silent. I will speak. And so that's what I decided years ago, is that it is important for me to go ahead and speak, put my vote in. And then if there's constantly impossible, nasty things on the ballot that are just disturbing because I have to choose between two evils, then I need to pray about that and see, is there something else I can be doing outside of politics that might impact politics so that later I can vote between two good options instead of just two bad options. And as you can tell, how you look at politics and things is also going to impact how you see the end of the world. And so there's a lot connected to here, and there's a reason why people are so passionate. But if an election can take away your love for your fellow man, then I don't think you're quite doing it right. I think you need to understand who Christ is, that he is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, that he has his own jurisdiction that supersedes all the kingdoms of this world, and we as believers need to be bowing before him and allowing him to have the final say in our lives. So those are a few of my thoughts on Election Day. There are things that change the world that are very ordinary, and you might put them, you might have a simple story of something that someone did for you once, or some simple event that happened to you that changed your life forever. Because I mean, if Stacy had not taken the time to talk to me there at the San Antonio Independent Christian Film Festival in 2010, and if we hadn't chatted for 10 minutes there, I wouldn't be here. My boys wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have made it into film in the same way that I did. I don't know what would have happened, but it changed the world. A simple conversation in the hallway. It's the simple things, I tell you. God is always at work, and it's often the very simple things that actually turn and become the things that change the world. The people who sit on the thrones think they're decreeing and proclaiming what's happening, but it's not in the decrees and the proclamations. It's in the doing and the being. You're a child of the King. Go live for the King. That's going to change the world. Love your fellow man the way the King loves them. Love your wife, your children, your husband. That's what's going to change the world. Anyway, those are my thoughts on things that change the world. Blessings. I'll see you guys next week. And I actually finally made it Tuesday at 10 today. Blessings.